Welcome, everybody, to Futures in Fundraising. I'm your host, David King, president of Alexander Haas. Today we have Adam Cotumaccio. Adam is the Executive Vice President, Chief Impact and Philanthropy Officer for the Muscular Dystrophy Association. Adam, welcome to Futures in Fundraising.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
Adam, I want to start to talk to you some about your background. You have a very diverse background. Maybe non-traditional for chief development officers, that goes from a successful corporate career, working on small startup for-profit entities, then moving into the nonprofit world with a 100-year-old and relative to Muscular Dystrophy Association, small nonprofit, and then to Muscular Dystrophy. So one of the things I wanted to ask you with is, so that move from the corporate side into nonprofit work, first question, what drove you to want to do that, to sort of change into that different mode? And then the second part of that question is, how did you go about making that change? Because I'm contacted all the time by people in corporate work who say they want to make a difference, and how do they get into nonprofit? And I don't always have the answer.
You know, it's such an interesting question. And I know that's two different questions, so I'll go through the first one. What's more interesting actually is I actually remember the month and the year, I'm not sure about the date, where I decided I wanted to go into the nonprofit sector. And it's a strange story as to why I remember that. But it was May 2002. So it was over 16 years ago. And the country had been devastated by 9/11 just 8 months earlier. Mm-hmm. And I was working on the inaugural Tribeca Film Festival. I had started a company called the Leverage Group. And at the Leverage Group, we specialize in entertainment, sports, and cause-related partnerships. And we were hired by the Tribeca Film Institute, that's the nonprofit arm, to really work on the festival. And we were instrumental in bringing in American Express as the founding sponsor of the festival. And there was just a tremendous amount of pressure because everything had happened so quickly. And I was downtown working the festival, and I was just taking a very late lunch break. And I went into, I went into a pizza place to just grab a slice, something quickly. And I started having a conversation with the gentleman behind the counter. And it turns out that he was the owner of the pizza place. Mm-hmm. And I explained, my involvement in the festival and what I was doing there, and that we were literally trying to rebuild downtown New York. And he literally broke down into tears, and he thanked me. He told me that because of my efforts, we had given back his livelihood. And, having the festival, I'm even getting emotional talking about it. Having the festival was a way to rebuild downtown New York and create something that would help the community, involve families, bring in desperately needed revenue. And it was an amazing example of my direct impact, having a direct impact on this gentleman's life.
Right.
And he needed to say he gave me the slice for free and offered me a whole pie. And that moment really stuck with me for a very long time. It helped to guide my career. And, to answer the second part of your question, it wasn't easy making the transition because that was 16 years ago. And I really only been involved actively as being hired in the nonprofit sector for about 5 years. So it took about 11 years to make the transition. But I will say that during that 11 years, I became known as the quote unquote, the expert, so to speak, in cause-related marketing when I was working on in the for-profit sector. Yeah. So for a number of years, I would go around not just the country, but the world, because I ended up selling my company to a large media conglomerate called WPP. And I stayed on for a number of years. But basically, I was going around making a living working with for-profit entities and partnering them with nonprofit entities. And making the transition, it was interesting because a lot of times in the nonprofit sector, there are people in the sector that believe you must have nonprofit experience.
Yeah.
The only way that you can move in, that's the only way we're going to hire you. And my first foray into nonprofit really occurred at Spence Chapin when they were looking for a CFO, COO. And I suspected I might be able to break in the operational space. And what was also interesting was they liked my entrepreneurial backgrounds. Even though Spence Chapin was 110 years old, they saw that I had successfully started a couple of companies. They saw that I had launched different brands or whatever else. and they were trying to reinvent themselves. And so that also helped me, the whole transformation messaging and trying to really change an existing nonprofit. And so basically I went there, and that was a little over 4 years ago, and I helped to transform them. And then I always knew, before I moved into the nonprofit space, I had a long talk with my wife, and I said, listen, this will be a lifestyle change, but this is something that I'm at a point in my career and I really want to do this. And so I had a lot of her support and my children's support. And when I was at Spence Chapin, yes, it was a lot smaller than MDA, but I knew in my heart that I could operate on with a larger platform. But I really value and cherish the time there because it taught me so much about the space and what to do. And then obviously I went on to become the president and then the CEO of Spence Chapin, and now I've transitioned over here in a development role. Yeah. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, we love long-winded answers on this show. I think, when I talk to people who are in the for-profit sector and they want to make that change, and oftentimes their motivation is exactly what you described. It's this: I'm doing well, I love my career, but wow, I want to change people's lives in a different way. But one of the barriers, and it sounds like you were very aware of this and had a forthright conversation with your wife about it. One of the barriers to making that move, if you're fairly well along in your corporate career, is the finances of it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not, it's the finances. It's also the sector of nonprofit that you go into. Different sectors pay differently, obviously, certainly the position. But first and foremost, it's also hard to recruit sometimes really good talent. But I do find that I pride myself in helping to develop people's careers, whether it's in the for-profit space or the nonprofit space. I view myself as a successful manager when I bring in somebody and I manage, or on occasion I can mentor, which is always wonderful, and then they go on to do great things. I view that. I love that. And so I will say that all the people I talk to, like you just said, they come to the for-profit space, or the nonprofit space, because they do want to give back, or they feel that they've taken their career to a certain point and they want a different type of challenge. But yeah, there is the reality of the different pay scales and everything else. But on the flip side, the meaning of what you're doing with your life. Listen, at Spence Chapin, I was, creating families. Here at MDA, I'm really transforming lives, giving strength back to families, individuals. I mean, it's an exciting time at the MDA. Literally in the last 4 years, there's been more innovations in science and care than the last 50 years. And so I feel I'm very humbled to be here, to be even a part of MDA's, call it their DNA, is a humbling experience. And I'm just excited about what lies ahead.
So how did the MDA opportunity come along for you? You're the CEO of a nonprofit and
yeah, so MDA was talking to me for a while. And I was kind of in a good place where I was happy there and everything else. But, again, going back to, unfortunately, my wife's grandfather had ALS, passed away from ALS some years ago. So there was a personal connection. And while you don't have to have a personal connection to the mission, I think it does help when you have that passion. I'm certainly passionate about family. I'm certainly passionate about children's initiatives and helping out children, but also adults, education, technology. These are all interests of mine. And so, coming here to the MDA, it kind of reached the nexus of all of those things. Okay. It also, I know one of your original questions started out with my career path. What I find interesting here at the MDA is it's really allowed me to pull from all the different parts of my career. I mean, I started my career as a dress buyer for Lord & Taylor. You might say, well, how does that fit into all this, right? And, there I was in my 20s, and I learned how to grow a business from 0 to 80 million. And because it was the large size category, which really only Lane Bryant and Macy's and a few others had been in the large size category years ago. Then I went to Deloitte & Touche as a management consultant in the retail sector. I was at Deloitte for about 6 years. And, that taught me a tremendous amount around strategy, a tremendous amount around process, around people and systems, all the really three important foundations of what you need in any business or any nonprofit space. And then I went on to start that company I talked about, the Leverage Group, that was then sold, and we did the Tribeca Film Festival. All of those experiences, and of course my nonprofit experience, I feel in some way they led me to where I am today, because MDA has so many things going on so much transformation that's occurring that I'm really pulling from all of those areas. And that's why having a for-profit background, I think really can benefit the nonprofit space if people are open to it. It really starts with the board and their acceptance to try something new. And I would, for whoever's listening in, I would very much emphasize that you should try it. If you've got good people that are willing to make the change, I'm not saying there aren't good people in nonprofit. There's a tremendous amount of good people in the nonprofit space. But I think it's about thinking differently, about trying new things, and being bold enough to do it.
And I also think, and we've talked about this in other episodes of the show, in a for-profit space, no one would look at having a very talented CEO or a very talented CFO or any, as being overhead. They would look at those as mission critical functions. But we get into the nonprofit space and all of a sudden we start branding things that on the for-profit side are considered an absolute must. You must have a CEO that's a dynamic leader if you're going to grow, right, in the for-profit side. But we get into the not-for-profit side, it's like, oh, that's too expensive. We can't pay our CEO that much. And we sort of do things on the cheap sometimes to the detriment of the growth of the institution and the sector.
That pressure I've noticed is both internal and external. Because you'll get it internally with maybe the culture of the nonprofit, the history of the nonprofit, the board, perhaps. But it's also external in the sense of, how a nonprofit is rated, how much they're spending on salaries. And so there is a little bit of that stigma out there that is, it's just the reality of the situation externally as well. And I think that slowly that's changing, where people are, to your point, they might see the value of who's bringing in what and having a dynamic leader at the forefront. But, I think some nonprofits are ahead of that curve and some are very much behind that.
Well, and even, you look at the disconnect, even at the tax law change last year basically penalizes not-for-profits that compensate their any of their staff, but primarily CEOs, highly. There's a tax on that the nonprofit has to pay on any employee who's paid more than $1 million. If you're running one of the very large not-for-profits in this country, or a very large university, $1 million compensation for that, if you think about the compensation of a CEO of a similar sized for-profit, $1 million wouldn't get them in the door.
Right. Unfortunately, I don't have that problem.
Neither do I, but it exists out there. I want to ask you a question about MDA and donors at MDA. I worked at the United Negro College Fund early in my career, and we had an event called the Lou Rawls Parade of Stars Telethon. So we raised a lot of money with a TV show, variety show kind of thing, but also taking live phone calls, and a lot of that giving comes out of just pure emotion. People see a problem and they want to support it. A lot of people of my age, and I think you and I are probably similar age, of our age, when we hear MDA, we think Jerry Lewis and telethon, at least I do. So you guys have that same dynamic. One of the challenges we had at the College Fund was trying to find a way to connect that emotional, spontaneous telethon donor to the organization so they would become a multi-gift donor or a long-term donor. I would imagine you guys have that same dynamic at MDA to some degree.
We do. So a couple things. First of all, because I do also come from the media space. Mm-hmm. I mean, the company I talked about and that I sold my company to was WPP, one of the largest media conglomerates in the world. And so I really understand the power of media and content. Yep. And, when you're talking about your telethon or the Jerry Lewis telethon, there really is content. And so, one of the things that we have here at the MDA is we do have a tremendous amount of content. And, and the content not only is around the amazing work that we do and really just those testimonials from families, from children, from adults, because of the innovations that we've helped to spearhead and fund, people are living longer with neuromuscular disease. And so I think that one of the important things is, well, how do you get the content out there? So if it's not in the form of, say, a telethon, right, how else can you get the content out there? And so, so for instance, for the entire month of November, We're engaging with MDA supporters on our social channels, encouraging them to share points, share photos, videos, describing who gives them strength. Giving strength is important. It talks about who we are. It talks about what we do. And, that can be sharing content with a friend or a family member or a caregiver. The caregivers really are amazing that are out there. And we also encourage supporters to share why they donate or why they might give their time to MDA or how they might give strength to somebody in their lives that might even extend beyond neuromuscular disease. So we believe that implementing a user-generated content approach to certainly Giving Tuesday, but also just in general, will encourage people to share messages of strength, donate to us, donate to our campaigns, and really help. It's certainly a complex question and a complex answer. I also think one of the things that we're also doing is, in the past, it appears that MDA was probably very reliant, and not probably, we were very reliant on the telephone. And I think, to be perfectly blunt, we probably missed a number of opportunities to really engage individuals. And as we know, when you look at the philanthropic landscape in this country, which, by the way, is at an all-time high. Right. I think that in the recent CCS report, it just hit over 410 billion.
Yep. And we know they had 410 billion last year.
Yeah. And the majority of giving is individual donors. And when I look at MDA and how the makeup of what we do, the majority of our giving is actually corporate giving.
Which is the smallest slice of the pie if you look at Giving USA.
Exactly. So on the one hand, we're incredibly grateful and gracious to all of our corporate donors, whether it's Citgo or the International Association of Firefighters or Harley Davidson or Casey's General Store or Acosta or the National Association of Letter Carriers. I could go on.
Yeah.
We have some amazing, deep, meaningful Dutch Brothers, corporate donors. What I'm here to do now is certainly maintain and grow those, because like I said, there's a number of nonprofits that would love to have those relationships. Those relationships go back for decades. But where I think we missed, the point was there's just so many individual donors out there that have not necessarily been engaged in the way that I might engage them with traditional moves management approaches or traditional recognition or thanking them or really from a major gifts perspective. And so when I look at where we have income and funding coming in, it's a little almost lopsided. And so I'm here to change that, and that's one of my strategies.
We're going to take a really short break. We'll be right back with Adam and more Futures in Fundraising.
I actually love talking to the people that I get to speak with on a daily basis. So with our clients, as a campaign strategy study coordinator, I make the calls to set up the interviews for the campaign strategy study. A campaign strategy study is when one of our clients is wanting to conduct a campaign. We do a study to help them determine not only the feasibility of the campaign, but also what the strategies of that campaign should be. So I speak with some of the coolest people on a day-to-day basis. I'm calling people all over the nation, all over the world sometimes. We get interviewees for clients in other countries, and it's really fascinating to talk to these people.
Welcome back to Futures in Fundraising. Our guest today is Adam Cotumaccio, Executive Vice President, Chief Impact Officer, and Philanthropy Officer for the Muscular Dystrophy, easy for me to say, Association. I may have to stick with MDA going forward. I know I can get that out.
MDA is fine.
So, Adam, we were talking about the funding mix at MDA and how it really is almost turned upside down for the national funding mix of donors. And I know one of your one of your charges at MDA is developing new streams of income,
Yes.
which is probably something everybody would like to be doing. So talk to me some about that charge, strategies that you're taking toward developing new streams of income. You mentioned in our last segment that you felt like to some extent the organization had sort of missed the boat on individual donors. So I would imagine that's something you're engaged in. But tell us about new funding streams and what they are, what they look like for MDA, and what you're trying to do to attach to them.
So by the way, I should mention that even though we might have missed some opportunities over how many years with individual donors, I know that it's not too late. You started off by saying that we're probably of the same generation. I think we are. And, what's fascinating is I would say around that 46, 47 and older demographic, people not only know the MDA, there's a tremendous emotional connection to MDA where people remember fondly, Labor Day and watching television and sitting at home. I would say that when you go 45 and under, some people know us because of our reach and the work that we're doing, but there's a lot of people that don't know us. And so going back to the individual donor or major gift type of revenue stream, I feel there's still a tremendous opportunity to tap into the markets, the areas, the people that know us. Certainly the people that don't know us, I am out there and I'm always talking about how we're the largest source of funding for neuromuscular disease research outside of the federal government. A lot of people don't know that we have invested more than $1 billion in neuromuscular research. Or, we also run the largest network of multidisciplinary clinics where we provide best-in-class care to 150 of the nation's top medical institutions. We have a resource center, a nationwide resource center that serves the community with one-on-one specialized support. And we offer educational conferences and events and materials for families and healthcare providers. Something else where we have a tremendous amount of reach, which, by the way, these all have revenue streams, and I'm getting back to your question that can be tied to them. We send thousands of children and young adults to camp every year where they learn vital life skills and gain independence at summer camp at no cost to families. We fund 100% of these things. And the latest thing that we're doing, which is also going to be an interesting possible revenue stream for us, is we've also recently launched our Mover initiative. Mover is the first and only data hub that aggregates clinical, genetic, and patient-reported data for multiple neuromuscular diseases to help improve incomes and accelerate drug development. So it's an exciting time right now. So going back to your question, absolutely 100%, we're going to be going after individual donors. We're also, we really haven't made enough deep impact with foundations. If you look at the fact that we're at the nexus of not just social services, healthcare, but even technology, and you look at where we operate and what we do and the impact that we deliver in tens of thousands of people's lives every year, it's significant. We just commissioned a report recently that just came out by IQVIA that really is the first report of its kind that is aggregating all of the neuromuscular disease category. And it's showing that neuromuscular diseases in general cost this country $46 billion a year.
Wow.
And that there's about 250,000 people that are affected by neuromuscular disease. And that puts us a little bit outside of the orphan disease category. Yeah. Usually it's around 200,000. So it's a large category. There's a lot that we do. We are absolutely the leader in the research and the funding in this area. And so going back to revenue streams, it all starts with going back to your core. And there's so much that we do that people don't know.
You went through a litany of things there that I was not aware of.
Well, and so I might be new, but I hope you see I'm passionate about it. And it's amazing the depth and breadth of this organization. And it's my job to get out there and hit the pavement and really communicate, talk to people, and really engage them in the right way so they know what we're doing. I would also add, more importantly, in my role, from a development perspective, it was imperative that I met with families. It was imperative that I met with just our communities. And so I've literally been traveling every week, meeting with people, learning about people, their experiences, how they were interacting with us. I mean, I've only been here since September, but I think it's so important to immerse yourself, especially the fundraising professional, you have to immerse yourself in the mission. You have to immerse yourself with individuals that are directly impacted in whatever you're working on. And, the only way to do that is to see it firsthand. And that, when you see it firsthand, you really see what our impact means and how important it is for the communities we serve. And so, it was funny. My first day here, I went to the Harley Davidson 115th anniversary. And it was also celebrating our 38-year partnership with Harley Davidson.
Mm-hmm.
And I met MDA families from around the country, including our national ambassador, Faith Fortenberry, and her mom. And, I've now met Faith and Leanne, her mom, a couple of times, and just being there and interacting with them and everybody else whose lives have been affected by neuromuscular disease. It's very inspiring. And so anyway, I'm rambling. I'm sorry if I'm rambling.
No, that's fine. I wanted to ask you about this. When you talk about new income streams, you're talking about organizational change, right?
Yes.
You're talking about a change in maybe not organizational focus, but maybe some change in the focus in the development office for sure,
Absolutely.
and some culture and thought process. So how has that been for you in the time you've been at MDA in terms of managing change? Because change management, there's a whole industry around change management. It's not easy.
And I will say, when I was at Deloitte & Touche as a management consultant for 6 years, I learned quite a bit about change management, and also studied it a little bit when I got my MBA at NYU. It's funny. I've actually given talks on change management. The first thing I ask everybody in the room to raise their hand on who likes change. Inevitably, people do raise their hand, and I always call them on. I go, you know what? You might say that, but a lot of people want to know that when they leave on Friday and they come in on Monday, that things look the same. There's a comfort level there. It's not that people don't want to embrace change. It's that it's difficult.
They like controlled change. They like change they can control, which is
Absolutely.
not usually how it happens.
And there's two types of change. There's change with individuals, and there's change with organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be a coordinated effort. And so, it's a delicate question to answer in the sense that, so I came here and knowing what I know, and that I have been hired as a change agent, for lack of a better word, I also wanted to be respectful of what has been built. I wanted to listen. I've done a lot of listening. Who am I? I just got here. There are people here 20 years,
Yeah.
and I need to listen to them on what's important to them organizationally, what's important to them from an impact standpoint, from a delivering our services, our mission standpoint. So I think a couple things. To deliver change, the first thing you got to do is listen. You got to be a good listener. The other thing is you have to bring people along with you. Where we are in a different world. Okay? We don't necessarily have the same reach that we used to have. There's a lot more competition out there. Even though philanthropy is doing well, there's a lot more competition out there. And so part of it is, in the sense of change management, absolutely making sure and identifying who else in the organization can come along with you, not forcing change on people, but making them be part of the change, but also helping them to see that we need to change.
Yeah.
The changes has to occur. And so, right now, for instance, one of the things I'm talking about with our regional directors is even how we are organized. You look at development, right now, about 80% of our efforts come in through events and corporations. And, if I want to go out there and start engaging individual donors more, well, what does that look like? And, how do we have to change?
Yeah.
And it's almost like trying to, in your mind, move away from how we're organized or what we might look like today.
Or even staff skill sets. You don't have a lot of major gift officers probably if you're heavily event driven, right?
No, we're looking for them. So we
and everybody else.
I'm a firm believer in the other thing I love about our staff is even though people might not have a skill set, can they be developed?
Yes.
Can they evolve? Do they want to evolve? Can they learn? I mean, listen, I look at myself, I went into the nonprofit space. I didn't know anything about development. And here I am now. I'm a development officer for one of the largest nonprofit in the neuromuscular space.
Yeah.
And what I did was I pulled on other parts of my career where I learned, for instance, the development, not to cheapen it, but it's very much like sales in some way, where you have to engage with people, but you have to engage with them in a way that for something that they're passionate about.
Right.
When I first started, I always felt weird about asking for money, which is not at all what you want a development officer to do. I learned that skill set where now I celebrate it because I know that I'm talking to somebody across the table who's also passionate about our mission and who wants to give and has the desire to help. And so now, I celebrate that. And so change is a tricky thing. I don't think it's a one size fits all approach. I think it's, you really got to look at the team that you have. But to close out your question, I would say there's 3 things I also look for in change. People is number 1. You got to have an A team, or at least develop that A team. You can have a B plan, but you got to have that A team. Yeah, you can move mountains with an A team.
I like that.
I would say that processes are very important. How you get the work done.
Mm-hmm.
Who's doing, because when you have change management or reorgs, a lot of times the processes don't get documented in the right way, or there's new processes or new ways of doing things. And having the discipline to really sit down and go, okay, this is what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
This is how we're going to operate. This is how we're going to behave. And the last thing that's really critical is systems. And right now we're actually undergoing a Salesforce implementation right now.
Bless you.
Our systems are at best archaic, and it's almost embarrassing. It's just where we are. We're like circa 1970 with some of our systems here. And so we're doing a huge Salesforce implementation right now. And that's also going to have change management elements to it.
In a lot of different ways, for sure. So one of the great things that's happened here in the last decade around philanthropy is the birth of, and now the growth and evolution of Giving Tuesday as a way to promote philanthropy in this country in a fairly big way. And it also, for organizations, can be a tool for tapping into individual philanthropy. So is that something that you guys are trying to utilize, the Giving Tuesday concept, as you try to tap the individual income stream?
Oh, absolutely. And so going back to Giving Tuesday, giving strength and give strength, which is what we keep talking about. Mm-hmm. You're going to see that hashtag and everything around Giving Tuesday. People with neuromuscular disease literally have had their strength taken away. And what we do in our work is we give strength. That's not to say our families, our patients, people with neuromuscular disease, it's not to say they don't have strength. They have a tremendous amount of strength. It's just about how else we can help and give strength.
Sure.
And so absolutely for the entire month of November, we're working and engaging all of our social media channels and encouraging them to share photos and videos. And it's absolutely a huge strategy for us. Also, we're doing stuff whether it's, Amazon Smile or Alexa, we now have it where you can reach out to Alexa and donate to the Muscular Dystrophy Association. All of these things are tied together, and social is such an important piece of our strategy. So Giving Tuesday is certainly a foundation for it, but it doesn't end there. It extends beyond even Giving Tuesday into what we're doing every week, every month around the different touch points that we have from a social media standpoint.
Yeah. Adam, this has been great, and I have learned a lot about MDA today that I didn't know, and I actually did some research preparing for this conversation. So I'm sure people in our audience have also learned a lot about MDA and about neuromuscular disease in general. But if they want to know more, if they want to get involved, how can they get to MDA? How can they learn more about what you're doing?
Thanks for asking. The easiest way is go to @MDA.org. And certainly there's a number of ways that listeners can get involved. First of all, listeners can volunteer. We have over 20,000 volunteers nationwide. We really, truly value our volunteers. They're amazing. Listeners can also visit our social pages @MDA.org, can join our Giving Tuesday campaign, post photos and videos of sharing your stories on who might give you strength. It could be people that aren't even tied to neuromuscular disease. Is there somebody in your life that gives you strength? Certainly, it's easy to donate and start your own fundraising campaign through Facebook. I certainly would love that as well. But please feel free to go to MDA.org and you'll see there's a number of ways you can get
Great. Well, I want to thank you, Adam, for joining us today. It's been great to have you on Futures in Fundraising. I want to thank all of you who joined us for this, and encourage you to join us again for the next episode of Futures in Fundraising.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a true pleasure.
It's great. It's our pleasure.